No.
No, her computer's awake. We need to go out and reshare. Option and reshare. Yeah, it's a good plan.
Okay.
If you move through pretty quickly, it should be
Yeah,
fine.
yeah.
All right.
That'll be fine.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get started. And our first, don't move.
I'm not.
Our first return to kind of live lectures for this year. So I'd like to welcome everyone who's attending online and those of you who were brave enough to come out for real tonight. So thank you for being here to be in our audience. Tonight, it is my great pleasure to introduce Dr. Mitra Hooshmand of the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine. Just to harass Mitra as much as possible, we're going to do our introductions and our preface in a Peter Donovan-esque format. Dr. Donovan is the founding director of the Stem Cell Research Center here at UCI, and he does a lovely thing with speakers often where he sort of interviews them on the fly rather than giving a formal presentation. No lie, this also makes it much easier for us to deal with hybrid mode and having to switch between computers. So that's going to be our game plan tonight. So Mitra,
Eileen.
welcome back to UCI.
Thank you.
What is your familiarity with UCI?
What don't I know about UCI? Although on my drive here today, I realized the entire structure of this area had changed. So I guess things do change. But what you're getting at, I assume, is the fact that I've been really at UCI for probably way too long, since my undergrad and then graduate school, some postdoc, and finally was able to part ways several years ago.
We
So-
tried really hard not to let her go. So, what did you work on for your dissertation, Mitra?
That's a great question. So I don't know if, no, you didn't mention it in your introduction. So I was a graduate student in this very building, and amongst one of the first graduate students that Eileen had. So when Eileen actually contacted me about and invited me to do this talk, I was like, you never say no to your graduate advisor. So it's weird to be here, to be in the same building, see some of my coworkers colleagues with whom I'd worked for so long. But it's been a while, but my dissertation was really under Eileen.
Her dissertation was really her own work, and she did a beautiful job of it. And so you can't say that it was under me or under Brian, really.
Your supervision.
So we're always very proud of our students, of course, but Mitra, it's a particular pleasure to have you here. I wonder if you might tell us a little bit, because you have really a firsthand view towards this, of what the process was like of going to work towards Prop 14 and the passage of Prop 14 to refund CIRM, because I suspect that's a tale that not everyone is really familiar with, just in a few snippets, because of entering into that process really at the point that we went into the pandemic shutdown.
Yeah. So what you may not know is that during the time that I left Eileen's lab, I joined an organization that led to the initiation of what I'm here to talk about, CIRM. But between that time, there was also sort of the deadline or I guess the ticking time bomb for CIRM to go away because it was past its 10-year mark. And so the same organization turned into or converted into the campaign organization to help the reauthorization process for CIRM. And this was right around the pandemic time. In fact, I think we were collecting signatures for Proposition 14, which was the initiative that led to the reauthorization of CIRM, right around this time in 2020, March of 2020, which was when the pandemic started. And that was quite a chaos. You can imagine having to get signatures from people when nobody even knew if they could touch a pen, or nobody wanted to, touch a cardboard or anything like that. So it was interesting to have to collect, I think it was close to a million signatures that we needed. Yeah. And we did it successfully. So that was quite a feat. But I attribute a lot of that really, of course, to the entire campaign team, which also wasn't very large. But it goes to show you how much grassroots efforts have an impact.
Exactly. And I think it's really interesting because of just how much support had to be there from the residents of California, right, in order to drive that forward. And then last question, and you can actually do your prepared presentation. What is it that you do now?
Well, we're going to talk about all of that, but I am very happy to report that I'm at CIRM now, obviously. I mean, that's what I'm representing today. My job, my actual title, as you can see here, is Senior Science Officer for Strategic Initiatives and Special Projects. And I work directly out of the President's office and helped with really the writing of the strategic plan, the 5-year strategic plan for CIRM. And now I'm helping with coordinating the execution of that plan. So that's my current role. I'll reshare this. No worries.
With that, thanks everyone for being here, and please go ahead.
Thank you. Let's make sure this will reshare.
Yeah, just stop sharing.
This is Murphy's Law. Not the settings, just change it. Did it stop mirroring?
Go back to PowerPoint.
Oh, I don't think it's sharing right now.
Yeah. So it's your PowerPoint thing.
Let me play it one more time.
All right.
We can see her.
Yeah, we can see
slides.
Can you? But we can see it. So let's stop. Where's your PowerPoint thing?
Right here. Oh, it's here. That's weird.
What do you see?
I don't see the share.
Okay, that's okay because you're not in Zoom.
Not share.
Have to first.
If you just go here. And then- No, I think it's an X out and do it again. Yeah. Go back. Do you see anything,
What do
Brian?
you see?
Okay. Oof. Hybrid. This is what happens when you go hybrid. Oh, it's gone again.
So I have a low tech solution.
What happened?
Enjoy yourself. The public audience can see the slide. Let's go. This is kind of happening. We got 50 people online.
I'm okay. As long as you guys can see, though. Are you sure?
Yes, you can.
That's true. You can also, yeah, follow online.
Yeah, I think yeah, it went off the room.
Why does it do that though? 'Cause-
I know because it's on plug in the power. It's like trying to go to sleep.
Oh, then maybe
So
take
then-
that off too. Yeah.
It was already so
Yeah, because it didn't look like it was going to sleep.
So, but I think probably you're like stopping the question.
It's not coming up on the screen either. Huh. Isn't it showing something right now?
Well, you're not
Yeah.
projecting
Hold
it
on a
yet.
second, but I duplicated it. Never done.
Now I see the display. Could it be my connector? Is what? Haunted? You held that information back. Yeah, let's try a different one. Although the USB seems to be fine, right? Because
Right.
it's
Yep, I think we got it right. Yep, it's a dongle. The
okay.
joy of the
So it
new-
was my fault after all. Well, see, this is what happens when you don't give a talk for 2 years. Actually, on my way here, I was trying to figure out what do I need? Like, what are the different items that I need to bring with me to give a talk? Because it's been so long
Okay.
since
think
I
we're
gave
good.
an in-person talk. I think we're good. Thank you, Kyle. Okay, excellent. Well, thank you so much for joining. You guys who were brave enough to join in person and everybody who's at home. It's like I said, it's an honor and a pleasure to get an invitation from Eileen and to be back at my alma mater and the place, the very building where I did my dissertation. Eileen sort of already walked through my journey, but just to go through it in a very short summary one more time. Like I said, I went to undergrad and graduate school here, so I'm Zot all the way. I did my dissertation in Eileen's lab, and my work was focused on stem cell biology. So I looked at the effect of neural stem cells after transplantation in spinal cord injured animals, and looked at the various aspects of the inflammatory response after transplantation. And so stem cell biology has really been a part of who I am since a very long time ago. I won't say how long because I don't want to date myself. After I finished, I did a postdoc here, but I also kind of took a detour, of which Eileen was incredibly supportive. And I'll come back to the importance of that at the end of my talk. But I decided to start my own venture, my own business in yoga, of all things. Think about that. Someone with a neural/stem cell biology background starting a yoga studio. But I took a risk and I did it, and it was great. We survived for 5 years, which was more than what I ever expected, and had to close the doors right around the time COVID hit, which again, I was totally fine with, because that just showed that we made it. And just like everybody else during the pandemic, of course, things changed for us too. From there, I taught for a while at UCLA, taught stem cell biology. So again, really stayed connected to the stem cell world. And as I told you earlier, I then went on to work for Americans for Cures, which was the organization that led to CIRM, to the initiation of CIRM in 2004. And that organization later turned into the campaign organization for Yes on 14, which was the proposition that led to the reinitiation of CIRM. And all of that to say, I finally made my way to CIRM after being, I think I was probably supported by a CIRM grant even when I was a grad student here to some extent. So, and I certainly worked in a CIRM building. So really, I'm probably living proof of how much CIRM has been able to impact the lives of many people, including myself, and sort of shepherd me through the career transitions that I made, even though I took some detours along the way. So a little bit about CIRM. Our mission is accelerating world-class science to deliver transformative regenerative medicine treatments in an equitable manner to a diverse California and world. And I can tell you, since I was on the other side of the campaign side of writing the actual initiative, that the components that have gone into this new mission of CIRM since our launch or relaunch in 2020 were really important to the author of Proposition 14, Bob Klein. And part of that is the idea of delivering and giving access to a lot of people who may not necessarily have access to clinical trials and therapies that emerge from stem cell research. And so this was a really important component of the CIRM mission. Now, to share a little bit about the impact of CIRM up to today or up to 2020. First of all, historical context, like I said, Prop 71, which was a $3 billion funding, state funding out of the general funds, what passed in 2004. And that led to the generation or creation of the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine. Since then, CIRM has accomplished numerous things. It's been patient-centric. It has developed a huge workforce for the future generations, some of whom are actually sitting here in this audience. It has led to a lot of faculty members from outside of California coming into California so that they can benefit from CIRM funding. It has led to the generation of buildings like the one that we're sitting in today. So a lot of different ways in which CIRM has impacted not just the science of California, but even the economy of California, which really meant that it needed to continue. CIRM had a 10-year lifetime, and just by virtue of the Prop 71 initiative. And after the term ended, Californians had a choice. They could either continue to fund CIRM, or everything would go away and the funding would go away with I guess, the abandonment of CIRM. And thankfully, California voters voted yes. It was quite a close call. I think we were at like 50.9% vote. And again, you can imagine getting the number of votes that we needed during a pandemic was also quite a challenge. So we're really happy that that happened, and that led to a $5 billion refunding of the California Institute for Regenerative Medicine. Up until now, CIRM has funded a variety of different programs in 5 major pillars, which you can see here. The major programs are discovery, which is just sort of the basic science that CIRM funds, translational research, which is that bridge between discovery and the clinic, clinical research, which is the pillar that funds all the clinical trials. There's infrastructure, which helped, for instance, with the development of new buildings, and education, which some of the Bridges students here in this audience, for instance, would relate to. And the numbers that you can see here is how much CIRM has invested up until now in each of these different pillars. Now, to get a little bit deeper into some of this impact, the organization has funded over 1,000 projects. This includes in all of those different pillars that I discussed, spanning across 75 different diseases. And up until today, there has been 77 clinical trials that have been funded by CIRM, and these are in a variety of different areas, disease areas, especially focusing on rare diseases, which is really important because that's an area of unmet medical need, and CIRM is really interested in high-risk, high-reward projects of such. There have been many first-in-human trials that, like I said, rare diseases are a big one. And one favorite example for me is the clinical trials that CIRM funded for ADA SCID from Don Cohn's lab at UCLA, which has led to essentially a functional cure for children who are born with without a functioning immune system, or SCID, severe compromised immune deficiency. In terms of impact within the scientific field, there have been over 3,000 publications that have come from CIRM funding, 12 research facilities and 17 shared labs resources, which we'll talk about in a second. A lot of inventions that have emerged as a result of some of the tools that CIRM has funded, and two major initiatives that led to the initiation of an iPSC repository with a variety, a large number of lines, iPSC lines that are accessible to anyone who is interested in using those lines, and the genomics data sets that has also received the support of CIRM. In terms of the clinic, one of the major footprints of CIRM has been the generation of what we call alpha stem cell clinics, one of which is at UCI, in fact, which helps to shepherd patients through different stages of clinical trials. We'll talk a little bit more about these in a second as well, and has also helped to expedite the process of having clinical trials go through the regulatory process, which is also really helpful and important in getting therapies out to the public. This has been a critical hallmark for CIRM to really try and accelerate the movement of therapies forward. Because a lot of times there are bottlenecks going from translation to the clinic, and then from the clinic, the different phases of the clinical trial also have their own bottlenecks. And lastly, in terms of its imprint on education, this is probably one of my favorite areas, one that we're going to focus on a little bit more today, is that CIRM has trained over 3,000 students across a variety of different areas, all the way from high school to postdoctoral levels, and has also led to over $10.7 billion of gross output for the state of California, which really suggests that the economy has also changed. The economy of the state has also changed because of CIRM's existence. And you can see there have been over 50,000 FTE jobs that were generated as a result of CIRM's establishment. Full-time equivalent. So in terms of leveraged funding, this is also quite impressive that CIRM has been able to pull in a lot of money from other sources as well. Industry has often matched some of CIRM's funding. There has been co-funding that has come in with a lot of grants. And all of this has really, again, led to lots of stimulus for the economy of California. And you can see, I mean, the lists, we could put all the lists here for you to see, but 6 portfolio companies have gone public because of CIRM funding, and 4 have been acquired. So these are, again, these are all ways in which CIRM has been able to accelerate research and at the same time promote industry to also come in and take a lot of these therapies and advance them forward. And the reason it can do that is because it has predictable and recurring funding opportunities. So here you can see the discovery programs and the discovery pillar are funded twice a year, translational programs 3 times a year. So these are the number of times that applications can be submitted to CIRM, and clinical awards can come in 12 times a year. So that's once a month. So there's clearly, lots of opportunities for people who want to get funded, researchers who want to get funded, to get that funding. And importantly, this application process is also very rigorous. So the way that awards are selected is based on, as you can see here, a rigorous eligibility criteria that's done by CIRM internally. Applications that are selected then go on to a grants working group. They're reviewed by a panel of expert scientists within the field, and are essentially vetted, for lack of a better word, very similar to the way that they would be at NIH. And then whatever application is recommended for funding by this group of scientists goes on to the board of CIRM, and the board is then able to vote on whether or not they approve the funding, which oftentimes if it's recommended by the GWG, the board has approved funding for it. So this helps to make sure that the grants that come through and the awards that are given out are always meritorious. And we like to set people up for success. So the best of the best are hopefully handpicked to continue advancing their studies forward. Grants Working Group. Thank you for asking all the acronyms. This is helpful for me to also know what are some of the things we need to write out. Are you good, Kyle? Okay. So all of that was about the past, but we're here today to talk about the future of CIRM. The title of this talk was, "Where are we going?" So let's talk about that. So up until now, The past has been, to build this pipeline and to get therapies to slowly move through in these high risk, high reward projects. But the future, not just for CIRM, I think for all of science altogether, but really with a huge emphasis for CIRM, is with an eye towards collaboration. And in fact, when Brian and I were talking, Dr. Brian Cummings, who is Eileen's partner in crime, and I in many ways consider him to be my mentor as well. When we were talking about what would be the title of my talk, he was the one to suggest, where are we going together? And then I saw that and I thought that's so appropriate for this particular stage that CIRM is at, because we are trying to promote and foster this culture of collaboration. And the idea of really scientists working together, because if we learned anything from the time of COVID, one of the biggest lessons was that when people come together to make things happen, they can do it. And they can do it in a very short period of time. Who would have known that we would have 3 different vaccinations in just 1 year? But collaboration made it happen. And so clearly this culture works. And so the future of CIRM is to promote a paradigm shift towards a culture of collaboration with a team science approach across a diverse workforce and partnerships with external stakeholders, leading to accessible revolutionary treatments. I know that's a mouthful and it sounds like a lot, but I highlighted some of the keywords here: the idea of team science, the fact that this has to be a diverse cohort. We can't just continue to train the same people with specific interests. We have to become more diverse. Partnerships are important, and that ultimately the drugs and therapies, anything that comes out of stem cell funding or CIRM funding, needs to be accessible. And so that led us to the 3 main strategic principles that are outlined in our strategic plan: advance world-class science, deliver real-world solutions, and provide opportunity for all. And we're going to be leveraging the 5 pillar programs that I described earlier to advance these strategic goals. So what comes under each of these goals, and I'll get into each of them in just a little bit of detail, not too much, I promise. But under advanced world-class science, we will be developing shared resources and building knowledge networks. Under real-world solutions, the idea is to help the advancement of therapies to marketing approval, create a manufacturing partnership network, expand the Alpha Clinics network, and to create what are called community care centers of excellence. And under provide opportunity for all, it's to build a diverse and highly skilled workforce and to deliver a roadmap for access and affordability. Of these goals, since our launch in January, just 2 months ago, we have already released an RFA, or request for applications, in the area of expanding the Alpha Clinics. And there's another one coming very soon for workforce generation. So I'd say that's pretty good. And in just 2 months, we were able to release those awards, or at least the applications. So we're on our way to, and Dominoes have been sort of a main theme for CIRM. We're on our way to slowly knocking down those dominoes and hopefully having a huge ripple effect down the line. The Alpha Clinics, like I said, have been launched already. The Compass program, which I'll talk about today, has also been launched. And we just finished actually last week, not weekend, thankfully, a workshop that Eileen was in fact a part of, which helped us to better understand, helped us as in the organization, CIRM, helped us better understand what the future of shared resources and the idea of building a knowledge network would look like. And we received some great inputs from panelists, including Eileen, that will hopefully help us figure out what this is going to look like in the future. So in terms of our first strategic goal, or shared resources, I first wanted to highlight the fact that these resources exist today. And Eileen, is, as the director of the UCI Stem Cell Center, has been overseeing, in fact, one of the 17 shared resources that are available. And these are opportunities for a lot of scientists from outside of the institution itself, within the institution, at different laboratories, to come and use resources that are shared. This can be for fee for service. There can be the various models, and each shared laboratory may have a different model for how they share those resources. But regardless, they provide the equipment, the tools, and even the coursework many times for allowing shared resources. And originally under Prop 14, under Prop 71, the purpose behind building these shared labs was to have them serve as safe havens for human embryonic stem cell research, because at the time, human embryonic stem cells, you may remember, were not allowed to be used under federal funding. President Bush had signed an executive order that did not allow the use of HESCs with federal funds. And so at that time, CIRM came in and allowed for the researchers in California to get funded through CIRM and be able to use HESCs. And that was huge. That was a really significant step for us to be able to advance forward in the field. Today, there isn't as much of a need for, perhaps isn't, although I've heard Larry Goldstein, who is one of our board members, argue that there is in fact a need still even for a safe haven. And it's true, because we also don't know how politics may change. So there's still probably some need for that. But in addition to that, there are lots of new technologies that need to be shared. And through the generation of, or continuous generation of these shared resources, we're hoping that more and more scientists can continue to collaborate on some cutting edge technologies like CRISPR, gene editing tools, et cetera, and continue to collaborate with one another. I won't touch on knowledge networks for now, because it's still really at its infancy, and we're still determining what that's going to look like in the future. With respect to delivering real world solutions, so again, there were multiple components to this. And like I said, the major goals under this particular principle were to advance, to be able to advance and accelerate therapies through the regulatory pipeline, to be able to overcome some manufacturing hurdles. And there are some plans in the future about how we would do that, but also to expand alpha clinics and create what are called community care centers. And I want to focus my attention today on the last one. So again, let's take an example out of UCI. So UCI, along with UCLA, has a joint alpha stem cell clinic. And this is under the direction of Dr. Daniela Bota. And the purpose behind this network, which currently, as you can see down at the bottom on that map, there are 5 of these alpha clinics at the moment, is for them to deliver stem cell clinical trials to patients. Now, what's important here to recognize is that what these alpha stem cell clinics are offering are FDA authorized clinical trials. And this is really important for everyone. I mean, I don't know who in this audience is from members of the public, but for sure online, whoever is a member of the public, it's always important to distinguish between what's FDA authorized and what a lot of people may consider to be sort of clinical trials or therapies, stem cell therapies that they sell off as an effective therapy. This is very different. And if I were to join a clinical trial, I would want to make sure that it comes out of one of these alpha stem cell clinics. Currently, if I'm not mistaken, and Eileen may be able to correct me if I'm wrong, hopefully I'm not, I just looked at the website. I think the UCI Alpha Clinic has 13 active clinical trials, and these range from in a variety of different diseases, including diseases that I can't even pronounce. I think it's Pompe disease, if I'm correct. Anyways, but clearly it's that the alpha clinics are also why, looking at a wide variety of different diseases that they offer in terms of potential clinical therapies. And the goal for CIRM is to expand these. So the new RFA that's out is hopefully going to fund more of these alpha clinics and allow for more clinical trials to be accessible, FDA authorized clinical trials to be accessible. But that's not where it ends, because the alpha clinics are in places like Irvine and LA and San Francisco and some of the metropolitan areas where they're accessible to the people who live around that area. But what about the people who live, in the places that I don't even know the names of, out of ignorance probably. But we need to make sure that any therapy that is developed out of CIRM funding is also accessible to the people within the communities that do not necessarily have access to the clinical trials. And so one of the main strategic goals for CIRM is to establish these community care centers of excellence. And the goal is to have these community care centers talk to and communicate with the alpha clinics. Obviously, the alpha clinics are very well equipped to drive clinical trials. So it may be that somebody who lives in, in a place where they don't have access to an alpha clinic would have to make one trip or several trips to get a clinical trial, a therapy within a trial. But they could do all of their follow-ups potentially within their own community without having to drive or fly and pay for lodging and bring a caretaker. And so all of that is going to make a really big difference in terms of the diversity of patients that enroll in clinical trials as well. And that's a really important component of this. And lastly, in terms of building a diverse workforce and having a roadmap for accessibility and affordability, these are really important components of making sure that anything that we do at CIRM continues to have a ripple effect for generations, because it's not just the current generation of scientists that are driving the science forward. We have to think about what happens further down the line. And so it's really important for CIRM to continue generating these on-ramps so that different, very diverse groups of students can continue to be educated in the area of stem cell biology and regenerative medicine. And there are many new areas in which CIRM can facilitate a lot of training. These can include things like data science, which is becoming more and more popular and important for advancement of science, or science communication, manufacturing, which I know a lot of scientists have expressed they have a very hard time with because of the bottlenecks that are there for manufacturing. So all of this is hopefully going to help open up some of the bottlenecks for pipelines coming up. In terms of where we are today with education, you can see there have been three, or really, yeah, we can call them three different programs that have been funding students all the way from high school to, as you can see, postdoctoral fellows. And the resume, the portfolio of CIRM is down below. You can see how many students have been trained in each of these different areas. But I think what's really striking here is to recognize that CIRM has really invested in training everyone from high school level onwards. So it has really, starting Prop 71 times, it has started to think about the importance of continuing to develop the future workforce. And so these are the current active programs: Spark, Bridges, and EDUC 4. And all of these actually had a funding cycle already that completed, or the awards went out. So for another 3 to 5 years, many of the different institutions have already been funded to bring in Bridges students or Spark students and train them. The new one that was recently approved by the CIRM board is called the COMPASS program, or EDUC 5. And COMPASS, by the way, stands for Creating Opportunities Through Mentorship and Partnership Across Stem Cell Science. So quite a mouthful. But this program has the objective of preparing a diverse cadre of undergraduate students for careers in regenerative medicine. So part of the major points is for it to be diverse. It will create a novel recruitment and support mechanism to identify and foster untapped talent within populations that are historically underrepresented in the biomedical sciences. So this is a really important element in this particular program to make sure that the students that come in are coming from underrepresented populations. It will combine hands-on research opportunities with structured mentorship experiences. And this is really, really important. And as I'll share with you at the very end, critical to the advancement of anyone, really. I think mentorship is a really important aspect of advancement. And fostering greater awareness and appreciation of diversity, equity, and inclusion in trainees, mentors, and other program participants. So again, there's a huge emphasis on recruiting diverse students and mentors to this program. There are a number of different trainings, you can call them, that the students who come in through the Compass program are going to have to undertake. And these trainings will help them to develop their skills so that they can continue to advance forward in regenerative medicine. And you can see the variety of different things that they're going to have to take on as they embark on this journey. And this is, by the way, a paid program. And I just want to emphasize, I forgot to mention it earlier, that Spark, Bridges, and Edu4, as well as the Compass program, are all paid internships. So, you know, I remember when I was an undergrad, if somebody would tell me that you could join a program and get paid $3,000 a month and have a number of different components of travel and conferences paid for, and bring some money with you to the lab that you're going to, I would be jumping on that opportunity. So the fact that CIRM has been able to recognize and support students financially to pursue the regenerative medicine field and gain more experience, hands-on experience, is, I think, very noteworthy. And in terms of the activities, so this is just to get into a little bit more nitty-gritty in case we have students here, undergraduate students here, who are interested in potentially getting into the Compass program if they're coming from various institutions. And I'm not even sure if UCI has put in a report, will be, okay. So parts of those are foundational coursework. There are soft skills like presentations and scientific writing. I mean, you can imagine that learning these things, despite whether you go on to have a scientific career in science or not, is important. Individualized mentorship, hands-on research, either in academia or in the biotech industry, patient engagement, as well as a capstone project. So just by quickly looking at this, I mean, you can see how it's checking off every box, right? It's research experience, it's clinical, almost clinical experience, because you have to engage with patients. It gives you the ability to potentially work in a biotech company, or, you know, somewhere where you can gain more perhaps manufacturing or other research skills, and all those soft skills that come with it. And of course, all the what I call in vitro work, which is the coursework that comes with it. So it's really covering all grounds. And it's a fantastic way for any student to really be able to advance their career forward and learn more about regenerative medicine. And so I wanted to end my talk with a personal story about the importance of mentorship, because that's a big part of what this program is about, the idea of having a mentor. And that's sort of what differentiates the program from, for instance, Bridges, which is more focused on, Bridges is also for undergraduate students, and it does certainly target diverse populations, not as much as the Compass program will. But Bridges does not necessarily have the element of mentorship. Now, some people are lucky enough that they go into labs like Eileen and Brian's, and they get excellent mentorship regardless. but this program, Compass, is really ensuring that there are opportunities for students coming in to have someone to mentor them, supervise them, hold their hands, and tell them where to go. And I think it's important to pay tribute because of that to my mentors, because a lot of times I think we forget that anyone who is able to accomplish or advance in their careers has really stood on the shoulders of giants before them. And for me, this has been very apparent every single step of my career. And I think the very first mentor, I really consider her my first real mentor, was Eileen, and I really should say Brian as well, but it was the International Women's Day, so I kind of had to focus more. Although although there is, one of my mentors is a man, but still. So Eileen was a huge mentor for me. And I told you at the very beginning that I'll come back to my detour to go and start a yoga studio. This was one of the places where I really, lots of experiences to say why Eileen was a great mentor, but this was one of the places where I really understood the value of a good mentor who is supportive of your decisions. Because a lot of times, we do take detours, and you need someone to be there and sort of guide you down the direction that you think is appropriate. And sometimes you don't see where that direction is. Somebody else needs to tell you that. And this is where I think Eileen was incredibly helpful to me in more ways than she probably even knows herself. One of those ways was by introducing me to Americans for Cures. She was actually the reason why I got my job at Americans for Cures. And so again, this is just to tell you that mentorship is what a lot of times enables us to take steps towards the next stage of our career. And so came in my next mentor, who was Bob Klein, who is the chairman of Prop 71, Prop 14. And it's incredible to work closely with someone who is that accomplished. And, when somebody is able to pass 2 propositions, you really start to wonder what are some of the capabilities and competencies of a leader of that caliber. Somebody whose words have that much impact, who also is truly passionate and believes in the cause for which he advocates. And I could see Bob embody that. I saw how hard he worked. I saw how dedicated he was to this effort. The man put, his own personal finances into the propositions. He put all of his time and energy, everything he had, went into both of these campaigns during the last year, at least of Prop 14 that I saw. So I think, again, in that sense, understanding and seeing something like that as a role model is really helpful for you to continue to strive towards your goals. And all of that brought me to Maria Milan, who is the CEO and president of CIRM. And again, going from Bob to Maria and seeing what it takes for someone to have a vision like hers. Because really the strategic plan was her vision. She will deny it, and she will say that this was everybody together. And it's true. It's definitely collaborative and teamwork, but you need to have somebody who has the bigger picture in mind. And being able to see the way that she works, being able to see how hard she works for one, but also the vision that she has, the way she keeps her eye on target and continues to work towards what the milestones are and what the goals are, really helps me, at least as someone who works with her, to continue to want to aspire to that. And so I wanted to end with a quote that somebody who I consider a high school mentor, this was more on a personal level, told me when I was in high school. And that was a long time ago. And I will never forget what he said. And every step of the way, as I went through all of these different stages, I always kept this in mind. And what he told me was, always surround yourself with those who have reached greater heights than you have. This way, you'll always aspire to become a better version of yourself. And it was because of this and having this in mind that I think I was able to take all of the different guidances and directions that I received from Eileen, Bob, and Maria, and continue to advance to some extent in my career. But this is also why I passionately believe in the idea of mentorship, and I'm really excited that CIRM has launched this new program and hope that many undergrads will be able to join and benefit from it. And with that, I thank you and take any questions.
A little scared about all the horrible stories we're going
You mean about how you made me cry? No, I'm just kidding.
I make everybody cry at some point.
Hi, Mitra.
Hi.
I have a question. You were talking about expanding the alpha stem cell clinics and the community centers. I forgot what they're called, the community centers. Are those only going to be in California, or are you going to other states? Because I was thinking, especially for some clinical trials, especially the rare disease ones, it would help patients in other areas to have more access if it expands.
Yeah.
Or is it just California?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I wish it was possible, but the proposition stipulates that it has to be within the state because it's state money. But hopefully at some point, you know, that will. Yes, if anybody wanted to join, they would have to travel. Yeah.
Hi. So I've been following Americans for Cures and CIRM and really excited about stem cell research and application, but I'm a little shocked hearing this, that it's aimed at these obscure diseases. Like you said, I don't even know how to pronounce that. If you don't, we certainly don't. I saw Parkinson's, you know, I'm sure we all know somebody with Parkinson's. But I just assumed, you know, when we're putting $8.5 billion into something, that it was going to go for the greater good: cancer, Alzheimer's, macular degeneration, osteoporosis. That, I mean, my parents died 5 years ago and they had all of those things. So you know, I was really hopeful that that was going to be the focus and not you know, some really obscure thing that isn't, you know, for all the people.
First of all, thank you for your transparency and for honestly expressing the way that you're thinking. And I assure you that it's not just the rare disease space that is being funded. So I talked about the rare diseases, but if you look at CIRM's portfolio, in fact, close to about 27% of the clinical portfolio alone is cancer research. Neurodegenerative research is another really highly funded area. So all of those are also funded, but there's also a big focus on the areas of unmet medical need. And the reason for that is because a lot of these more rare diseases are not normally supported, or they don't receive as much funding from the traditional pipelines like the NIH. And so CIRM was really trying to invest some money upfront on some of these diseases that don't get any attention, so that they could de-risk, because that's the other part of the problem, is that a lot of industry sponsors are not really willing to spend a lot of money on a disease that doesn't make them any money, right? That's the reality of it. But if CIRM comes in and supports a first stage clinical trial of a rare disease, and that has favorable results, now they've de-risked that study and have enabled an industry partner to come in and now invest and take that study forward. And so that's really been a big part of the focus. Having said that, like I said, there is a large amount of our portfolio that's dedicated to other more common diseases as well. And I will also add that the Prop 14 stipulation is that $1.5 billion of the $5 billion are earmarked for CNS diseases. So those include Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, macular degeneration, spinal cord injuries, brain trauma. I mean, you know, all of those areas that have not perhaps received as much attention in the last cycle.
So Mitra, can you repeat that question? Just
Sure.
because you didn't have the mic there.
Sure, sure. So the question was, how are we doing and in these different areas and our stem cells, the way to address some of the issues with these kinds of neurodegenerative diseases? I think the jury's out on that. We don't know yet, right? That's why we have to do a lot of these studies to better understand whether it's stem cells, whether it's going to be a combinatorial approach. Is it stem cells along with some sort of gene editing? Is it going to be, we simply don't know. So we have to continue to invest money into better understanding a lot of these diseases, understanding the role of stem cells in these diseases, so that we can just move forward in the field and figure out where the big investments need to be. I don't know if Eileen has more to add to that.
I would jump in there. Those are really excellent questions. And so I would highlight a couple of things for you. One is that the snapshot Mitra so kindly showed highlighting our alpha stem cell clinic, that's our current clinical trials. Those are the ones that are actively enrolling patients right now. But there are completed clinical trials for ALS. Actually, ALS went all the way to phase 3 and is in the approval process for with the FDA as a treatment, right? For cancer, for glioblastoma, adoptive T cell therapy. So these are CAR Ts. Those are fundamentally a stem cell treatment, a stem cell regenerative medicine treatment. And there's been a proliferation of those, right? As we all know, that have efficacy beyond what conventional chemotherapeutic agents, right, can yield. And so I think looking at that one snapshot is not necessarily the most representative. The other thing, so your second question touched on, are stem cells the answer? Is regenerative medicine the answer, right? What's the unique wow factor there in terms of potential impact? And actually, that's a great question to ask in the context of some of what Mitra talked about earlier, for example, severe combined immunodeficiency. And some of the biggest hits that have come out of the early years of CIRM funding are really about genetic diseases. These are diseases that affect the blood system, the hematopoietic system, with something that can't be targeted by a drug. But if you can gene edit and fix the stem cell population, you have a functional cure for that disease. And the development of that technology is really critical, because those initially small diseases that we were able to target with those gene therapy approaches combined with stem cells, that's great, because we have over 60 kids that are cured, functionally cured of severe combined immunodeficiency, leading a normal life. The technology that comes out of it, though, is part of a pipeline that's going to feed into other areas. And I think that's the thing to keep your eye on for this kind of funding for stem cells and regenerative medicine. Every one of those steps opens up a new pathway where we can move forward for other diseases. And that's the reason, in terms of Prop 14, why there's a particular focus on neurological disease. I do spinal cord injury work. That's where my lab is grounded. I certainly hoped that we would come up with a replacement cell and we would pop it in. In fact, as a part of our work, we went all the way through 2 clinical trials that are based in spinal cord injury. But the first cells that we worked with are not enough to go all the way over the edge. So science is a rinse and repeat process, right? And neurological diseases and injury turn out to be a harder nut to crack than some things that we can target in terms of inherited diseases that are genetic disorders. But we're learning from those all the time, and people are making progressive advances as a part of this funded pipeline. Does that make sense?
Sure. And I'm sorry. Here. So another thing that you said is the surprising speed that we got the vaccine, which was fantastic. And I volunteer for all kinds of clinical trials, so I'm familiar with the process. And like you said, we made it to phase 3. But they got to go basically, skip everything and with the vaccine, not skip everything, but it went really, really fast instead of 10, 15 years, like things, often take. So I was just, I was like, why can't we do that with cancer and with Alzheimer's, and let's do it for everything now, let's make it happen.
Yeah.
So, and that actually the story, Matt Inlay is not here. It's a shame he's not. That is such a great question, because that 1 year that 1 year to move forward with the RNA vaccines, right, for COVID was built on 15 years of work that happened before. And much of that work involved, in fact, editing in stem cell populations and identifying new mechanisms about how we can utilize that kind of approach to apply in a different direction of vaccine formation. In fact, do you want to go ahead and explain who? So
Derek Rossi?
yeah.
Yeah. So in fact, Derek Rossi, who is was the founder, no, well, he is still the founder of Moderna, but I guess no longer in that role. He was one of the CIRM scholars who worked in Irv Weissman's lab, and the discovery that led to the COVID vaccines for Moderna started from his work at Irv Weissman's lab probably 15, 20 years ago. So
Science has a long build process, is the short answer, right? So we have to find at the very early stages of that pipeline, and then there are really surprising ways where that comes to fruition. Sometimes, like with COVID, like right when you need it.
Robert.
Robert.
Hi, my name's Robert. You're a nice guy.
your mic turned off.
Hello.
Go for it.
Hi, my name's Robert. I'm a CIRM intern currently in Brian's lab. You spoke briefly about like the public becoming more involved with CIRM. What would that look like, and like how transparent will we be able to be? Like, I don't want to say like, we do scary stuff or anything like that, but how transparent will we be with the science and everything with them?
I would hope fully transparent from a scientific perspective, but in terms of engagement, it's actually a really good question about the level of involvement of community members. There's in fact talks for how we would be able to engage community members so that they can even be a part of the design of a clinical trial, so that they can give input about what that clinical trial would look like. What would be the battery of different instruments or tests that we would have to run in order to get the results that would go to the FDA. So this, and I mean, the way we're envisioning it is a significant amount of engagement from the community in terms of driving the research forward. So my short answer would be that it would be highly transparent.
All right, let's go to our huge online audience of thousands, where one AC says, will or does CIRM plan on studying aging and a potential application of regenerative medicine in the treatment of aging as a genetic disease?
Great question. So again, aging also falls into the category of neurological disorders for CIRM. Well, I guess it could really span a number of different areas, but a big part of it is going to be neurological disorders. And so under the $1.5 billion stipulation, if they're meritorious grants and they come in through the pipeline, I'm hoping that they would get funded.
So I want to pick up a couple of the questions that are in the Q&A, and I will be with you in just a moment. So a follow-up question would be what role patient advocates can play in CIRM's 5-year strategic mission, and maybe spend a moment and explain what a patient advocate is, because it kind of speaks to some of the questions we've got through.
Sure, and a great question. So patient advocates are those who are essentially advocating on behalf of patients within a particular disease community. So a patient advocate, for instance, in diabetes is an example, Bob Klein. He considers himself a patient advocate because he had a son who died from type 1 diabetes. And so that's a person who continuously works towards advancing the field forward so that we can find cures for type 1 diabetes. And the question about the level of involvement of patient advocates, again, goes back to Robert's question about engagement of the community. That's a part of it. That's a huge part of it. The patient advocates have to be involved, again, in the process, because we have to understand what it is, as a clinical trial is starting to form, it's really important that the scientists and the clinicians fully understand what it is that the patients struggle with. There are, I always think about when the concept of patient advocates comes up, I always think about one of our patient advocates, Adrian Shapiro, in the area of sickle cell disease. And some of the things that she talks about the pain that she has a daughter who is suffering from sickle cell disease. And when she talks about the way, the pain that her daughter has to endure and the way that she's treated when she has to go to urgent care and ask for painkillers, and there's always the stigma of why are you getting painkillers and are you an addict, and understanding that is really important in order to really be able to put together a clinical trial that brings that perspective into the mix is critical. So patient advocates are going to have a huge role.
So I'm going to do one more and I will be right with you. So health disparities is a big part of our central pillar in College of Health Sciences at UCI. And of course, UCI is a minority surveying institution. So one of the questions online is about what are the goals for CIRM in terms of addressing health disparities and sort of broadening it there a little bit. And importantly, affordability, right? Because with the advent of these new technologies, stem cells, in the area of stem cells and regenerative medicine, CAR T is a great example, right? Adoptive T cell therapeutics, where those initial treatments rolling down the pipeline are wildly expensive. So how do we think about addressing those two issues as we move forward?
It's a tough question to answer. And I'm certainly not in a position to answer it because in fact, as you may have noticed, one of the strategic goals was to put together the roadmap for a working group called the Accessibility and Affordability Working Group. And the whole purpose behind having this working group is to address the very questions that you just raised. And I certainly, this is way above my pay grade to be able to answer, but I think over the next 5 years, as this working group comes together, we'll have a better picture. We'll have painted a better picture of how we're going to get there. But I know from Bob's perspective, when he was writing the proposition, that this was a very critical aspect of the new CIRM for him, because there are a lot of therapies that are ready to get launched into the clinic and be accessible to the public. We just have to make sure that they're also affordable and truly accessible.
Yeah, a few things. My name is Dr. Philip Yu. I consider myself a stem cell researcher in the private sector. I'm the founder of Laser Med Pain Institute. We use different frequencies of laser and light photomedicine to stimulate the body's endogenous stem cells to heal itself, such as the 630 nanometer wavelength. Anyways, I'm glad you do yoga. I do Bikram yoga every week, but I don't consider that your straying. You're just, keeping yourself healthy. And probably, stimulating some stem cells during the yoga. Anyways, a few questions. So CIRM funding ultimately comes from the California taxpayers, correct? And I pay a lot of taxes as a business, I'll tell you that. So I think she's right in, we need Parkinson's research in these rare epigenetic diseases, but what about the general population with chronic pain? 80% of the folks go to a doctor because of back pain, and there's a lot of failed spinal fusions, opioid addictions, NSAIDs causing peptic ulcers, and it's really not the solution long term. So, and we know the opioid epidemic is out of control, 100,000 overdose deaths a year. So, it seems like there should be more 351 INDs for arthritis pain, There's so many failed knee replacement patients we see, and those replacements cause a lot of infections and blood clots, and they have to have revisions. And the last place you want to go is get an iatrogenic disease in the operating room. That's the number one killer with all these COVID and MRSA viruses lurking around, So yeah, it seems like for the amount of tax we're paying, let's put it this way. I doubt out of the thousands of INDs you've submitted, one has been approved that past phase 3, correct?
At this point, not yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it just behooves me. We're paying $5 or $8 billion for research that's never going to benefit one Californian. So what we do is we're not going to wait 10, 20 years to do a trial that's never going to be approved. We can't afford $10 million to do a 351. And even if it is approved, no pharmaceutical company is going to invest in something you cannot patent, because when a 351 IND, by definition, investigation new drug study, each dose of the drug. It's hard to call a cell a drug. It has to have this exact same milligram of ingredients in there. So 1 cc of cell could have 1 million MSCs, and one could have 800. That's the problem. They'll never prove something you can't predict to the exact cell and growth factor and exosome in that pill. They'll never approve it. I guarantee it. I've had meetings with Dr. Peter Marks. He's the FDA director of the Center of Biologic Development.
Yep. I know.
Yeah, we had meetings about, we'd like to experiment with Wharton's jelly and use it in a 361, fashion, which means it does not require any pre-market approval, does not require 351 IND. And he said, as long as it's homologous use, no systemic effect, and minimal manipulation. But again, the FDA doesn't really, give their approval for these. So we have to send patients overseas to get therapies that aren't really approved here. So my question is, you said these alpha clinics are FDA authorized, but they don't go through the full 351 IND approval, correct? So what does authorized mean? Are they getting an RMAT, compassionate use? How are they delivering these treatments at these alpha clinics?
No, so FDA authorized by definition means that they have gone through the IND enabling process. These have received INDs and they are performing they're treating the patients with the FDA authorization. So it's not, it's not just some
So is
random
it
clinic.
patient funded? The patient doesn't have to pay out of pocket. It's all funded by CIRM.
It's not, well, it's funded by the trial. It's not funded by the patient.
Mhm. Yeah, so my point is like hers, that's great, but if it's not going to be approved, it doesn't really benefit anybody outside that trial, correct?
But as we discussed, the portfolio is obviously expanding across. First of all, there have been studies that have been funded in arthritis and fibromyalgia and pain. So CIRM has also invested in these various areas of research. Now, whether or not stem cells are going to be the answer to these particular disease areas is unclear. And why there hasn't been as much funding perhaps in some of these areas could also be related to the applications that come in. Because remember, there's a process here. People have to apply, scientists have to apply. If there aren't meritorious applications coming in that the GWG or the Grants Working Group is approving or recommending for funding, then you wouldn't see those get funded through CIRM.
Well, so another question, are all the studies through CIRM, are they all from embryonic stem cell sources?
No.
Okay. So you do use, birth tissue products such as umbilical cord tissue.
There's a variety
blood
of different stem
exosomes.
cells.
Okay.
Yep.
The embryonic stem cell that is used, is the source from aborted fetuses or in vitro fertilization?
It depends on the application that comes
Okay.
in.
An embryonic stem cell by definition is in vitro fertilization.
Okay.
So it's from the inner cell mass of oxygen. But there's
Yeah. Yeah, that's my point. So George Bush, he banned the research on further lines of embryonic cells because of the abortion issue. So I'm
It
like,
actually wasn't about the abortion.
Yeah.
So I think you have some misconception
Yeah.
about the bachelor. I would be completely happy. to
yeah.
stay out
No, my
of
point is,
the
if that's the issue, if embryonic, on a government level will never be approved for use, why do research on something?
No, but
that-
embryonic stem cells are currently approved.
Yeah.
Human
So
embryonic
the
stem cells
Bush-
are currently
the Bush
approved.
limitations were reversed
Mhm.
by
President Obama.
Barack Obama's presidency. So, and on top of that, the advent of the programs or induced pluripotent cells has really made.
Yamanaka growth factors from
So
Japan.
we
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
at least 2 of these community lectures that address some of the issues that you're raising online. So I would encourage you to have a look. at
Yeah.
those.
One last question to
One
address
last
that.
question,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
we need to move
minutes
on.
Yeah, the anti-aging. Are you aware of the Israeli study, 60 sessions of hyperbaric oxygen therapy taken to hypoxia, lengthen the telomeres, thus reversing aging, obviously stimulating your own endogenous stem cells. I'm wondering why isn't there research to that? And the Israelis already proved it. Like, why do we have to use cells? Why don't we use the body's endogenous stem cells and stimulate it?
We also
Yeah.
get applicants who stimulate
Right.
endogenous stem cells. In fact, there is an arthritis, specifically an arthritis grant that I can remember off the top of my head that was related to stimulation of endogenous stem cells. So it just depends on the applicants that come in. Some could be stimulating endogenous stem cells, or some could be exogenous. I mean, as long as it's a for-profit, nonprofit company, you can apply. Yeah. But remember, it has to go through the same process. It has to go through the vetting process of the GWG and the scientists there who are deciding whether or not they recommend it for funding. So CIRM is not the one who makes that decision. Yeah.
Absolutely. So are there any questions online that we should just try and pick up one quickly? That's not the right response. One last question from the audience, and then I know we're a bit over for time today, so that we'll wrap.
Sure.
I know I've had more than my share, but if we wanted to volunteer for clinical trials, how do we do that with CIRM?
I think that's
So
for
it's
you.
going to be disease indication dependent, right? So the alpha stem cell clinics, of which there are 5 and probably will expand to somewhere between 8 and 10 by around mid this year after the this round of applications goes in. All of them have a website. All of them have listed on that website the current clinical trials they're running. And let's just talk about that for a second. How does a clinical trial get started? Because I think there may be a little bit of misconception about how that works. A clinical trial gets started either because an independent investigator, me, let's say in the area of spinal cord injury, says, I think I have something that has the potential to help people. I have to accrue a body with CIRM funding or other funding of preclinical data. I have to go to the FDA for what's called a pre-IND meeting, investigational new drug meeting, and say, this is what I think I want to do in terms of a clinical protocol. These are the data that I have to support it. I can tell you those applications in terms of foundational preclinical data can be thousands of pages long. The FDA would say back to me, we agree with the questions that you've asked. We think perhaps you have some problems in your clinical protocol design. Have you considered this? And I get to say to them, okay, what is it that I would have to do? Would you agree that a safety study in this rodent model that involved this number of animals and tested these outcomes would be sufficient to support moving forward into humans for X indication for cervical spinal cord injury? And they would say, tentatively, we agree that that would be okay. And then it's my job to go back and do the rest of those studies, at which point I come to the FDA for a full investigational new drug filing. And the first and foremost concern of the FDA, remember, is about safety, right? This is why we escaped thalidomide in the US, right? It's the classic example. It's first and foremost about safety in that mantra of do no harm, right? So a lot of what you bring forward is safety data. And if the FDA agrees you have sufficient safety in the case of cell therapeutics, show us that it's not going to cause a tumor. Show us that you're not going to get an inappropriate formation of bone when you're trying to do a transplant into the central nervous system, right? Show us all of those things. If the FDA agrees, then they would authorize a clinical trial. And that's what Mitra was showing in terms of her slides earlier for the alpha stem cell clinics. The alpha stem cell clinics only traffic in authorized clinical trials that have been through that full vetting process, not just with a granting organization, but with the Food and Drug Administration to establish safety and the potential for efficacy. And then you can go ahead and do a phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. We have Brian, Dr. Cummings has a great one of these community lectures that's available online called, is it Hope versus Hype, Brian? That walks through the basics of a clinical trial and what's involved. And at that point, a clinical trial would be launched and you get authorized by the FDA to enroll, let's say 12 subjects in a phase 1, potentially several hundred subjects, depending upon the kind of trial. And those are the trials that are posted up on the alpha stem cell clinics. Now, if you have a particular kind of cancer, if you have spinal cord injury or traumatic brain injury, many organizations have registries for those trials. So you can go to one of those registries and put your name on the list and say, I want to be notified of new clinical trials in my disease area. Same thing for a number of the trials that we've run through the Alpha Stem Cell Clinic here. For example, for retinitis pigmentosa, disorder of the retina, there's a national registry and a registry that was created also in order to help subjects enroll in that trial. So those are the ways that you become involved. I think the other critical thing to make in terms of a distinction, so you asked like just the perfect question, so I'm sorry, I'm giving you a really long-winded answer to wrap up here, is to make the distinction between what's called direct-to-consumer marketing clinics and something like an alpha stem cell clinic. So a direct-to-consumer marketing clinic is something that is not going through that FDA process. So sort of the clinic next door, I've seen a number of exposés on Channel 7 News and Channel 5 News here. Lee Turner, who's a new recruit and is starting a brand new ethics and policy center at UCI as a senior faculty member here, has a wonderful also community lecture from January that addresses this specific issue because it's the area that he publishes in. And the distinction there is direct-to-consumer marketing doesn't go through any of those processes. And the FDA has really lagged in terms of regulation here. They've struggled with how to deal with homologous use and autologous cells. The challenge is that without the kind of preclinical data to support the work that's being done with direct-to-consumer marketing, that's not the same as a clinical trial. It doesn't rise to the same level. And it's a real cause for concern. And so I would encourage you, if you're thinking of getting involved in something, talk to your clinician before you approach any of those types of clinics, or focus on something like an alpha stem cell clinic network in order to make a distinction between those two very different plans of FDA authorized trials and direct-to-consumer marketing. Okay. With that, I'm going to close for the evening. So thanks everyone for attending. Thanks for your patience and joining us online and for being here in person. Good night.